I've been lurking on YouTube for at least a decade now, and I decided it's time to start making videos as a hobby because it seems like a lot of fun and there's a pretty cool community and everything. Um, so I wanted to start with a brief intro, though, about where I'm coming from and what I'd like to add, if anything. My experience is pretty similar to many YouTube skeptics who historically have found YouTube as a place where like-minded people could get together and talk about skepticism, atheism, critical thinking, rationality, all that good stuff. It was nice to find others who like discussing this sort of thing, and you have your ideas challenged, solidify your understanding of concepts. Get in internet arguments, which some of us can never get enough of, it seems. So as for my background, I've read a lot of the books. I've attended some skeptic conferences and participated in the usual message forums, and I really felt like I found a place where I kind of belonged and could talk about things that I normally couldn't really talk about around the office. I mean, it might not have been super controversial, but people just didn't really get why anyone was that passionate about that sort of thing. And so the community was really strong, and we seemed kind of united around these core principles. But like many noticed, when groups like Atheism Plus and Free Thought blogs started taking these really like hardline stance on certain pet issues, which I may have completely agreed with, but I didn't really feel like they were pertinent to skepticism. Um, that's when things really started to change for me. And so, like, listening to different YouTube atheists or YouTube skeptics, they all seem to have a different idea of when things started to shift, though they pretty much agree on the general timeline. For me, it was when I noticed PZ Myers on his blog began his crusade against what he called the quote-unquote dictionary atheists, who defined atheism as nothing more than a lack of belief in a deity, which is a position I take because it is the correct position. I mean, it is just objectively true. He argued it should be more than that. Like, oh, it doesn't say anything about you to say that. And to an extent, he's got a point in that you can't really have a community centered around just a lack of belief in something. And we didn't really. I mean, we were more than that in that we advocated skepticism. There's a reason I tend to call myself a skeptic before an atheist, because an atheist doesn't imply anything except that. A skeptic implies a bit more than that. And you could call me a skeptical advocate. So anyway, I, like many others, disagreed with PZ Myers' position, and we quickly learned just how intolerant he was of other positions. I mean, not just... He can always be pretty vicious against people who disagree with him, but to the point of like excluding them and banning them. That's when it like crosses a line and becomes like not at all what skepticism and free thought and free open discussion should be about.
There was only one reasonable conclusion. Thunderfoot was trolling free thought blogs. He was uncollegial and hostile. His only interest was in disruption and opposition, and he clearly did not share in those free thought ideals or our fellowship of interests. In fact, as his recent complaints have shown, he didn't even understand what free thought is. So we did what we always do to trolls. We kicked him out.
And with this introduction of new pillars of the movement, if you didn't agree with every single one of them, then you were called out as a bigot, you're a sexist, you're a racist, you're a misogynist, you name it. And we saw so many well-known skeptics and atheists being singled out and shunned, like one by one, like, I'm gonna boycott, I'm not gonna buy your books, or we're not gonna invite you to conferences, and you should be ashamed, you should apologize, blah blah blah, for all kinds of, usually just for having a different opinion that didn't fit our new guidelines for a skeptical community. They didn't seem to realize that the more issues they made as requirements for the community, the more divisive and exclusive the community became, which seems completely counter to their goals of skeptical advocacy. Additionally, there was this clear trend of these ideas being more important than the practice of skepticism itself. In a sense, there was a conclusion that we started with, and now we had to find the facts to support the conclusion, as the old saying goes. And once you start with a certain ideology, it kind of undermines the entire point of skepticism. So as noble as a group like Skeptics might sound, then no matter how noble, how correct even it may be, if you're starting with a conclusion, that's going to threaten your ability to objectively examine facts related to that conclusion. The more conditions you add, the harder it becomes to be skeptical, the more polluted, in a sense, it becomes. But I confess, for about a year, I admit, I tended to side with all of these social justice advocates. Because in my mind, this was the right side. I mean, this was the right side of history. It was the right side to be on. And even when I saw some arguments that seemed a little shaky, I always thought, well, the truth is on their side. They're just having trouble working it out. And the arguments will always work themselves out in such a way as to support them because they are on the right side. And to be honest, there was a precedent for this. I mean, anytime the religious right would oppose a cause of social justice, they were shown to be unfounded, like demonstrably, obviously, like gay marriage, etc. And so I had built this association in my mind that, if you're on the side of social justice, if you're on the left, if you're a progressive and your ideas are progressive, they will necessarily be correct, like rationally justified, which is definitely true in many cases, but it's not a necessity. And I kind of thought it was for a while, which is a very unskeptical position to have. But as I continued to listen to my side, engaging in these back and forth arguments with their ideological opponents, which were also my ideological opponents, I would always expect there to be this big smackdown, and sometimes it would happen. But then I found this odd thing happen where, time and time again, my side would be countered with some pretty interesting points. And I'd be like, okay, that's an interesting point, but I'm sure my side is going to come around and show me and them why they're wrong still. But instead, my side would, when they were cornered, they would get really irrational and emotional and use diversions and accusations of bigotry, etc. And I excused it for a while, but then eventually I realized, okay, in some cases the only rational voice left standing is on the other side. And that was a big eye-opener for me. It was like my tribe, quote-unquote, was not what I thought it was. And I started to question everything, oh my gosh, what if all these boogeymen that my tribe had been shunning turned out to be not just bottom-feeding trolls out to cause chaos, but maybe they actually had some valid points. So ironically, it was all these accusations of these people being awful trolls and everything that made me start to listen to them more. And every time I would hear these accusations, I would question, okay, what is the real story behind this accusation? Let me go to where these supposed trolls are. Let me listen to them. Let me see what they have to say. And like I said before, time and time again, I found, they actually have some really good points. And that began within me this reinvigorated commitment to seek the objective truth, regardless of who it offended, regardless of which side it was on, because that was the most important thing to me and still is. So anyway, that's where I am now. I mean, I try to commit myself to seeking out the truth. I take an almost guilty pleasure in going against my own desires in the service of seeking out the truth. It's something I really like to not just give lip service to, but to actually do, despite the fact that it will make you enemies on both sides of the aisle if you do that. I imagine that my channel will discuss a lot of more casual, maybe trivial things, but even though I won't be totally serious about everything, I'm not just gonna sling insults without any substance behind it. I honestly don't have a problem with slinging insults, but I do have a problem with slinging insults and not backing up what you're saying with some kind of argument along with it. So if you made it this far, thanks for listening, and I look forward to creating more videos in the future. Leave a comment if you have any topics you're interested in or just want to harass me or something. And I'll see you guys later.